So we are entering into the second week of this year, and 2022 seems to be, pretty much in alignment with what I'd expect. A lot of good things happening, and I haven't been watching the news too much, but last week Reverend Margie gave us the letters to God. How many people did that? The letters to God. Now, those at home, those here in person, you still have time to do your letters to God. You can either do it online, and thank you. I see. Yes, absolutely. You did your letters to God. You can either do it online, or you can just a Sunday drop it off. And those letters to God, those are just really statements and what you expect to just unfold for you quite naturally in 2022. And these are kind of like these guide paths that we use, this letter to God. And when you receive it at the end of the year, you get to kind of reflect back on the things at the beginning of the year, the hopes, the wishes, the dreams, and everything else. And so I want you to hopefully take advantage of that while you still can, and then we'll mail it back to you. And I just know, I see in my mind's eye that all the wonderful things that you have planned for yourself do come to fruition. But I was also looking at this month and the faith component of it. And in January, we celebrate faith. And about a year ago, I was listening to a sermon on the radio by a local pastor, and he gave this great definition because I never could really figure out what was the difference between hope and faith. And so it just seemed like the same thing to me. And he gave this beautiful definition, and then when I tried to recall it for this sermon, I just could not come up with it. All I could remember is that he was saying that hope places something in the future, while faith keeps us present and moving in the present. And then I started thinking about it a bit more, and a memory of my dad suddenly popped up into my consciousness. And it was him dropping me off at Chicago Union Station, which is just like Grand Union Station, but in Chicago and not in New York. And I was on my way back to college. I was headed back there, and I didn't want to take the Greyhound because, as a college student, I didn't have too much money, but my dad did opt for the couple of extra bucks to send me on train back to Cleveland because that's where I was going to school. And I think my dad also wanted me to get a bit more wise on traveling and everything, and so that seemed like a great thing at the time to have a 19-year-old just dropped off in the middle of the city to take a train. And so train it was, and my final destination, like I said, was Cleveland. And as I was thinking about this memory, it hit me that I could equate faith to the train I was actually riding on, and the tracks that led me to my destination would be what I would consider hope. And hope was these rail of thoughts, deeds, actions, things like that, just in my words that were either in alignment with my good or rerouted me to my destination. So I started playing with this idea of faith being the train I was on and hope being the rails. So join me on this little adventure as we see if this actually works itself out. So I haven't really spoken this out loud yet, but I'm pretty sure what came to me will make sense at the very end. And so if faith is the train that carries us to our destination, it carries us there fully. It doesn't drop us off halfway. When we get on this train and we buy a ticket and we board it, we expect to get where whether it's the ticket or where we wanted our final destination to be, correct? Yeah, it's just one of those things, whether it's a plane ticket or a train ticket or what have you. When I buy a ticket to somewhere, when I invest something in my money or my time into something, I expect that I get what I put into it. And they say that with faith, that you have all the faith that you're ever going to need. There's no getting more of it. There's no trading it in for something newer or shiny or better. You can't borrow faith from somebody else. You can't, barter for it or anything like that. It's something that is within each one of us. And it's up to us to cultivate it and to stay true to it. And in unity, the disciple Peter best represents this faith faculty or this faith power. But why Peter? Well, Peter was once called Peter Simon. He was a simple fisherman when Jesus came across his path. But Peter stood out to Jesus because he had an attribute that the other disciples just didn't realize at the time. They hadn't actualized it yet. When Jesus went to the disciples and asked them what the people were saying who he was, they answered with what the world answered with. And what the world and what the people were reporting. Well, some say you are this and some say you are that. And then Jesus just got to the heart of the matter. He says, but who do you say that I am? Not what does the world report? He didn't ask about the world report. He didn't ask what was on the 5 o'clock news. He said, what do you believe? Who do you say I am? And it was Peter. Peter was the only one of the disciples that spoke up and said, you are the Christ. It was with the spiritual eye that Peter saw that. It was with the spiritual ear that he was able to discern that Jesus had fully realized the Christ within, and yet none of the other disciples at that time had realized it yet. So Jesus knew that Peter had tapped into something a bit more powerful, a bit more centered than the rest of the disciples. And in scriptures it says, and I also say to you that you are Peter. So he's now responding back to Peter. And it says, on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. And I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosened in heaven. Now, that is the New King James Version. But in the New Living Translation, the same verse says, now I say to you, you are Peter, which means rock, and upon this rock I will build my church, and all the powers of hell will not conquer it, and I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you forbid, so now we're looking at the word bind and forbid as being interchangeable. So whatever you say can't stand in your way or can't be done on your path will be forbidden. And whatever you say or whatever you permit on earth will be permitted in heaven. So metaphysically, we look at Peter as the rock, and it represents our faith. So Jesus is saying to Peter, and he's actually telling all the disciples, it's your faith that gives you the key to the kingdom. It's your faith that unlocks things. It is your faith that either binds you to a situation or releases you from it. You have the power to permit whatever is happening in your life to continue on happening, or to allow it to fade away, to lock it up, to throw it out and choose something differently. We have the ability to unlock our good. We have the ability to also bind it up. So faith is a double-edged sword. A lot of people think of faith when you're like, oh, keep the faith and everything like that. But faith can be used as, like I said, this double-edged sword. We can use this power, this faculty, the Peter within us, to do a lot of good. Or what I found somewhat funny is in the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary, which has 3 pages on just the definition of Peter alone and describing the attributes, the spiritual attributes of Peter. It talks about this essence of faith, and it mentioned that Peter can also be a weathercock if not identified with the Christ. Now, I didn't even know what that meant. I was like, what is a weathercock? So I had to look it up, so I Googled it. Does anybody know what that is? No, well, if you look, do you remember if you see, like maybe on a farm in the Midwest, there will be this little rooster, metal with a pole, and it kind of tells you which direction the wind is going. So if the wind is blowing south, that rooster is pointing south. If it's blowing northeast, it's pointing northeast. And if there is a storm of brewing, believe me, it is going in all crazy type of directions. Faith will, in all sincerity, affirm allegiance to spirit, and then in the hour of adversity will deny he even ever knew it. That's one thing about faith, is that it can change. it is not this, it's constantly with you, but where are you putting your faith in? And I know how that is to just deny something in the moment. I remember when my kids were really little, I would take them to the mall. How many of you used to take your kids to the mall? They're little. They start to see shiny things. They start to see the chocolatey things and the glittery things, and they want it, and they're grabbing. And as a parent, we just can't give them everything. And we have to use a little bit of discernment. And so my kids, I don't know about your kids, but my kids sometimes throw a little bit of a fit when I tell them no, not today, or maybe later. So at times in the mall, we would have this child of mine that would throw a fit, and in that moment, I would deny ever knowing it. The Peter and me denied that child. I walked on by, somebody get your kid. They eventually caught up. They realized I wasn't playing those waterworks, or I wasn't going to fall for it, and I didn't leave them there. But I digress. When we deny God's truth, when we deny the Christ, through worry, through fear, through fixing our mind on an unlikely outcome or on one of the many billions of outcomes, but it's negative, we're changing our faith. We're placing or misplacing our faith in something else other than God, other than the Christ, other than the promises that we were given. And there was a time where Peter did deny the Christ. And in fact, he did so 3 times during the ordeal of Jesus being detained and brought to Pontius Pilate. The Christ knows that we will be falling short at times. And he did actually predict this when he was doing the Maundy Thursday, what is it called? The Last Supper. There we go. The Last Supper. He knew that night, and he told his disciples, by the time the rooster crows twice, one of you will have denied me 3 times. Sometimes when the situation before us seems to be unfolding and it seems to be too much, for some people that might be the rent is due at the end of the month or the beginning of the month, or the car is acting up, or the numbers are going up, our faith starts to change teams. That weathercock starts to move about in strange directions. At times, we start off on a certain track in life. We're thinking we're going from LA and headed to Atlanta, but somehow end up in Albuquerque. Something happened along the way. The untrained mind is a bit fickle, and it imagines and it cuts with its very sharp scissors in the fabric of life the things that it believes. It starts to create and mold the things that it sees. Instead of trusting and sticking with the Christ within, there are times when it starts to believe the outer instead of sticking with the inner. And it can run wild. And the thing is that what we've hoped for, what we've prayed for, if it suddenly gets derailed, delayed, or denied, it's not because there's a lack of faith. It's because we're entertaining something other than what we initially started off on pursuing. They say every thought is a prayer. I think we also sing about it here in Unity, that every one of our thoughts is this prayer. What are we fixing our I am to? What are we saying, and so it is to? If we have a thought about something, let's say that you're going out for a job interview, and at first you start off, you board that train straight to Jobville, but along the way, doubt starts to creep in. We then find that the train suddenly moved direction. Our faith is now being placed on a different track. The track is somehow changing with that. In that moment, when you realize that you are off track with what your original intention is, you have the power, the very essence in you. And Jesus said, it's the key to the kingdom. What you bind here will be bound there. What you release here will be released there, in the heavens, in the higher realms of consciousness. Our faith allows us to choose the destination. It keeps us in alignment with our original intentions. When we look back at the letters to God that were written last week, or those that will write this week, reflect on those words from time to time. Reflect on your intentions throughout the year. Try to recall those things that you said would come to pass. Stick with it by your faith. It has already been told that that is your key. That is your ticket. Faith is some powerful stuff. And Jesus spoke about it, that even in the tiniest of it, just having a little bit of it placed in something the size of a mustard seed could move mountains. Maybe physical mountains, quite possibly, but I believe the mountains that Jesus was talking about are the things that we put in between ourselves and our good, the blocks, the thoughts that we're entertaining. He spoke to the common man or common woman so that they could understand. These mountains seem to be insurmountable. Sometimes our thoughts seem to be very overwhelming. That is a mountain that you are supposed to transcend, that you can lift through unlocking of your faith. Jesus said, I and my Father are one. What did that mean? That meant that he was always in alignment. He was always centered in that consciousness. He didn't deviate from it. Well, it's written that, there was very little deviation from it. That he believed that God was in him and he was in God. He said that I am the way, the truth, and the light. And if we know the Christ, then we know the one that sent him. Philip, one of the other disciples, wanted proof. And in John 14:9, we have the sense of frustration of Jesus when he said, have I not been with you so long, yet that you have not known me? All along through the ministry of Jesus, he was healing people and casting out demons and walking on water. And then there's some portion of the mind, the friend or whatever, that still wants more proof that God's in charge, that there's a connectedness, that the Christ exists, that it is one with its creator. And even in our own lives, how many times has proof popped up to us? Or maybe we've even demanded a sign. Faith says and goes forward with no sign. It says, I trust you, God, when I cannot trace you. I know that you are with me always and in all ways. Throughout eternity. And we're called to place our faith in that. We're called as disciples, as Christ-conscious beings, to follow the ministry that Jesus put forth, the example, the practicality. Nobody says it's easy doing that, but it is worth it. It is worth these things that he has done, that we shall even do more and greater, that we have that presence within us, that we have this power, that the example has already been given, the proof was already there. And now it is up to us to demonstrate the goodness, the grace of God. But yet, sometimes the mind still wants to show up and question things. They say faith without works is dead, but God is always living. And so on this train of faith, we have a conductor. We have somebody in charge as we, not saying take a back seat to our position in life, but as we get carried from miracle to miracle, from situation to situation. And every once in a while on this journey, while you're on that train of faith, you'll hear the conductor letting you know where you're at and where you're going. I know on my way from Chicago back to Cleveland, we made a stop near Gary, Indiana. Does anybody know where Gary, Indiana is at? Yes. Okay. So A couple of miles out before we got into the town, the depot, the conductor said, next stop, Gary, Indiana, and we started to slow down. Now, in the late 90s and early 2000s, Gary, Indiana was known as the murder capital of the United States. It was once a vibrant, thriving city when U.S. Steel was there, but when U.S. Steel pulled out of the town, it just became this desolate place. Many people just found themselves being idle, and without jobs, hopelessness may set in, directionlessness, and being idle can lead to all types of addictions and everything else. And I remember rolling up to that brief stop in Gary was an experience that I'd never forget. A few miles out, like I said, I just suddenly, what was once prairie land became burnt down buildings, police tape everywhere saying, "Do not cross." And I suddenly felt, when I was looking out my cabin window, just a little bit of anxiety happening. I know I didn't have to get off there. That was not my final destination. But just going through it gave me a bit of anxiety. Just seeing the state of affairs of other people, of this town, of this community, brought some anxiety to me. But luckily, I was still heading to Cleveland. So any momentary discomfort was relieved by the fact that I didn't have to get off that train. That wasn't where I was disembarking, and my journey was going to continue. And how often do we forget, when things look strange, that it's not our final destination? Just stay on the train of faith. Just stay on. Nobody told you had to get off there. Keep on going. But those tracks sometimes do change. And that's another thing that what I noticed when I was on this train, because it was kind of my very first train ride, is I noticed that even though at the train station, let's just say, everybody would start off kind of just going in the same direction, suddenly then we would be further and further apart. Each one of the trains was going somewhere else. And so we all began together, but each one of us had a different location we were headed to. And have you ever seen those cartoons or the characters in the cartoons where they see a train coming and then suddenly they switch that lever and they change the direction? Well, that's what we can equate hope to. If we say that every thought is a prayer, these are the things that we are entertaining. Then our hopes change. We didn't even realize, but the train tracks start to adjust according to what we are giving or feeding it or telling it to move. If I am looking, as the example before, for a job somewhere, and suddenly I read in the newspaper, New York Times, that jobs are scarce, that one must have a doctorate degree for this type of position I'm going for, it might change my hopes a little bit. So there is this little person in my mind adjusting the track just a little bit, and that's enough to keep me from my final destination. Now without even realizing it, those train tracks of hope have changed something else. I'm starting to give into the appearance of an outward situation or condition. And when we speak an affirmation or say a prayer, but our actions don't align with it, it causes all types of things to happen. I just know that when I don't keep with my spiritual practices, when I don't write down my goals, that I somehow drift further and further from them. Somehow that direction of that train that should have been headed to Cleveland is somehow now directed, right back to Chicago or somewhere else. And in the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary, it talks about this Peter, that it is this double-edged sword. And what derails us is not this lack of faith. We are the Christ And Peter is one of the 12 powers that we have within us. We get to identify, have that Peter continue to identify with our true essence of being. And any time we notice or have the awareness that it is going off track, that it is somehow headed in the trajectory of something other than what we desire, we in that moment have the point of power to get it back in position. And I guess that's the wonderful thing about this faith that we have, that it continues to carry us, that it continues to protect us. This train, the conductor, it will go wherever we send it. The track is endless, but it's our hopes, our prayers, our thoughts, our deeds that determine the way this track is going to head towards. So this coming year, I'm going to invite you all to start looking at the things that you think are impossible in your life. Whether it's health or finances, make it believable. You can only achieve what you believe. So if you want $1 million but don't have $1 million consciousness, then you're not going to get it. But make it something that you know is within your reach, and then stick to it. Write it down. Uncover, and this is going to be some self-inquiry, uncover any blocks to the awareness and presence of your worthiness for it. Those are things that derail us as well from our goals. When you set out on this train of faith, when you say that you are headed somewhere, all the kingdom asks is for you to use your key to unlock it, to believe it, to stick by it, no matter what the outward condition is, no matter how many times you got to roll through Gary, Indiana. That is not your final destination. Don't worry about it. You don't got to get off the train, like I said. Stay on it. Stay with the Christ. That's why Jesus told Peter, follow me. Peter had inquired about John. Well, what about him? He said, don't worry about him. Follow me. Why are you looking over there? Your business is right here. Don't pay attention to that outside world. If you want something, if you are called to it, then keep with the Christ. Keep with the truth. Put your faith in me. Because your misplaced faith in something else will still give you, it'll still go full steam ahead towards that. You get to decide the direction in which it's going. You get to decide where that faith is going to lead you. We can have either faith in God the good or faith in the outward appearance of something. And now I invite you to just close your eyes as we just take a reflective moment. We're calling on this new year to give us new beginnings. And let us begin this year by just obtaining that small something. But put all of your faith in it. You don't need to get any more faith. You have it already, all the faith you ever need, right there inside of you. Keep it on that goal. Allow it to come up in your mind right now. Make a promise to yourself, make a promise to the Christ that the Peter in you will stick to it. That no matter any appearance that contradicts what your heart desires, that your faith will see you to that goal. The Christ in you is strong enough, is wise enough the conductor of the train, God, knows how to get you there quickly. And only ask that your hope is in Him. The universe conspires and says yes to your every wish, your every demand. And allow every thought that comes through your stream of consciousness to be filled with that light and love, with that promise. If you put an I hope on any thought and it doesn't resonate with you, choose again. That power is waiting, ready, willing to bring the kingdom of heaven here to you in the present moment. Let us take this into the silence.